as a little bit of an agenda. First, we're going to do some welcome and introductory remarks. What you're seeing today, FloodSavvy, is a part of a three-year project we've been working on. So we're just going to give you a little history about why we ended up here today. Then we're going to have a couple of my colleagues do a live demo of FloodSavvy with a walkthrough. We're then going to have another set of colleagues do a walkthrough of our National Water Model tutorial. Then we are going to hear from 5 of our 6 community partners who have been working with us to co-develop FloodSavvy on their experiences through the co-development process and how they're leveraging this information in their work. And then we'll do a little bit of a concluding remark. And then just a little bit of a housekeeping note. We're hoping that looks like we already got almost 60 folks in the chat. Hopefully that'll be more. But if you have questions, we are going to have intentional Q&A periods after each of our main talk. So we just ask that we save live questions for that period. We won't take questions during the talks, but in the meantime, we have our chat feature, which all the rest of my team members will be monitoring. So if you have a quick question, please feel free to pop it in there. Or we also have the Q&A feature enabled if you want to make sure that question kind of stays popped out so it's first in line for that Q&A period. You can put it in there as well. And then in the Q&A, we will also have the ability, if you just want to raise your hand and you can ask a question live, whichever suits you best. But with that, we have kind of a packed agenda, so we're going to run right through. And speaking of introductions, so myself, I am Kristen Robb. I am the PI of our project here and a senior research scientist at the Global Resilience Institute at Northeastern University. And I'm going to kick us off by giving just a brief overview of the project that led us to FloodSavvy and why we're all here today. So about our project. This project, which is funded by CAIRO, which is a NOAA cooperative institute, has asked the overarching question, how can NOAA's National Water Model be used to aid in community resilience-related decision-making and planning? And for those of you who may not be familiar, NOAA's National Water Model was developed in 2016, and it is a hydrologic framework that simulates stream flow across river and stream reaches across the United States. And this goes for gauged and ungauged river reaches. So the National Water Model provides forecasts at 6-hour, 10-day, and 30-day intervals, also known as their short, medium, and long-range forecasts. And it also stores 40 years of retrospective modeled stream flow data showing what the model would have predicted if it was available before 2016. And what you will see here is this screenshot on our top right, the map with all the dots on it. This is NWIPS, NOAA's National Water Prediction Service. And this, if you go to water.noaa.gov, is how you would access this. And that's a screenshot of what you will see when you show up on that page. And this is where you're able to access National Water Model data through some of these options on the right-hand panel. And again, I'm not going to go into detail with this now, but if you do have specific questions, I believe we have some folks who are quite knowledgeable on the call, so we'd be happy to answer any questions as well. So for the purposes of our project, what we did to investigate how NOAA's National Water Model, which has primarily been investigated for use kind of in the short-term emergency management context, we were looking at, but what about other decision-making contexts? So to do this in phase 1 on the left, we did a 3-phase study. The first phase was very exploratory. We did a lot of interviews across the US to try to understand how does resilience planning actually operate in practice? And then how can the National Water Model help support this planning? So the biggest thing that we learned from those interviews was that 65% of the folks that we spoke to had actually never previously heard of the National Water Model, but when they did learn about it, they were very excited and they had a lot of ideas for how they could use it. However, they also noted that there were some accessibility challenges that they had with using the National Water Model. We found that most of these folks were not trained hydrologists, so they were requesting ways to make the technical information more accessible to them. We also heard that they really wanted examples of how other folks had used the National Water Model in their own work, but because very few of them had used or heard of the National Water Model, we didn't naturally have a lot of examples. So therefore, in our second phase, the second part of our project, we actually worked with 6 different groups of folks across the US to try out ways of which information were they interested in and how could they use it in their work. So that's our middle panel here. The biggest thing that we found from this exploratory part was that we found that there was a whole range of intended uses and users of this National Water Model data, and this ranged from technical to non-technical. But it also uncovered a lot of accessibility challenges, especially for those who wanted more technical applications of National Water Model data, but who they themselves were not a technical end user. Which brings us to the panel on our right, which is where we are today. Phase 3 was investigating and piloting ways to overcome these accessibility challenges more in depth. So for phase 3, which is what we've been working on the past year, which resulted in FloodSavvy, is we were working deeply with Vermont and Missouri boundary organizations in these states to investigate how they can leverage the national water model to increase community capacity to engage with resilience-related planning and decision-making. So here in Missouri, we were working with the Missouri Hydrology Information Center and then 3 communities that MOHIC supports, Roaring River State Park, DeSoto, and Springfield, Greene County. And then in Vermont, we were working with 3 regional planning commissions, Mount Ascutney Regional Planning Commission, Windham Regional, and Two Rivers Ottauquechee Regional Commission, and then communities that they support, who we will be hearing speak later this afternoon as well. So the co-development process that we engaged in is first we did a set of interviews with everyone. We really wanted to understand what decision-making contexts might national water model data help support. What are your information needs and challenges accessing this information? And then what are your ideas that you have for resources that could help you access and use this national water model information? We then did a series of collaborative sessions, which is where we laid all of these ideas out and we collaboratively decided which of them we wanted to pursue together for this project, which ended up being a singular resource, FloodSavvy, which met all 6 communities' needs. And then we engaged in a co-development process, which meant that we didn't just take that and build FloodSavvy. It was an iterative process where we would all collectively decide a direction. Our team would go away and try to implement it. We would come back, get more feedback, and iteratively go, which has resulted in FloodSavvy today. So with that, again, we just wanted to give you a brief history of this has been a lot of work and a really cool effort that has got us here to FloodSavvy. But before we dive into our demo of FloodSavvy, I just wanted to hand it over to Zach Becker, who is the unit chief of the Missouri Hydrology Information Center, who's been a really essential partner throughout the past couple of years of this project, just to say a few words to help kick us off. So over to you, Zach.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. My name is Zachary Becker, as she mentioned. I'm an employee of Missouri DNR, Department of Natural Resources. I've been a part of DNR since 2019. My very first day on the job was the 2019 flood. If you are from the Midwest, that was a catastrophic flood all across the Mississippi River Basin and the Missouri. And as I was driving into work, there was water on both sides of the highway, about 2 to 3 foot from the top of the water to the road, to the top of the road. I was a brand new graduate, and that was my very first experience of seeing flooding and the impacts that it can have. And since then, my time at DNR has been finding ways to communicate hydrology information, hydrologic data, to make it easy to understand. It can be really challenging to communicate with non-technical folks on what this data means. People can visually see impacts and they know when a flood gets bad, but when you communicate it on a graph or when you communicate it in words, it may not connect on the level of that impact. And so MOHIC has been created by DNR to kind of build this community here in the state. Our own work is we're getting out stream gauges, soil moisture sensors. We're building out a website and a mobile phone application, and we're using the national water model, which ties us into this project. This project came to us about 2 years ago, and we had let them know, the GRI team, that we're going to be using the national water model on our website. And then from there, we had the connection. So as we are striving ourselves to help communicate this information to the public and to make the national water model accessible and understandable for the public, this opportunity came about, from what I understand, was just a conversation at a conference. It was with Damon Hall, who was a previous professor here in Missouri. And through that conversation, DNR and MOHIC got tied with the GRI team. And here we are 2 years in with this wonderful product called FloodSavvy. Through this research, it went from a case study, as Kristen had mentioned, into how do we actually help communities here in Missouri. And so MOHIC functioned as a boundary organization, as we'd call it, trying to kind of be the middleman of reaching to both sides, kind of down to the local level, up to the federal, and up to this project, trying to communicate the needs and understand what's going on in the state for more of a flood focus with this project. And through that, we came to Springfield, Missouri, Springfield, Greene County, down in the southwest part of the state. We're working with DeSoto, south of St. Louis, and then Roaring River State Park, also down in the southwest. 3 communities that we are have worked with and talk with and engage with. And we saw an opportunity to connect their comments and their experiences to the GRI team and really help show how the national water model can be beneficial to them, but with the vision of making the national water model accessible to everybody in the state through different means and different products. And so one of the visions that we have here at MOHIC is having flood data like this something that you consume on a daily basis. I think most of us wake up in the morning, we check the weather, check the temperature, but are you checking your local stream gauge? Some of you might. Are you looking at the conditions that are prime for flooding? If you have a live out in a rural part of Missouri, you might experience low water crossings that are underwater. And so we have a goal of making this information easy to understand and easy to consume, and where it's easy to then kind of introduce into your daily routine, and hoping to help citizens here in Missouri use that information to make wise choices. Because I can't tell somebody to not take a certain route, but if I can put the information in their hands and show them, hey, there's a high risk of flooding on your way home, that means that we're doing a good job here in trying to communicate this information from a technical source down to the citizens of the state. So we've really enjoyed this project with the GRI team. It's been years of work, 2 years, many hours of meetings and interviews, many calls with Kristen and team and Tony and Irene and everybody from the Cairo team, or sorry, the GRI team and the Quasi team. I've been on site in DeSoto, walked around downtown to see where they have impacts and flooding. I've been down to Roaring River State Park, Mike Boosey-Cruz and his team. We've seen the impacts down there, and we're just really proud to be a part of this process and this project to connect the needs down in the local areas up to projects like this. And so we've had a blast on this project, and I wanted to thank you guys for letting me speak, and we're excited to see where this project goes. So thank you, Kristen.
No, thank you, Zach. Those are really kind words. And I will say too, I think we've been really grateful. Everybody that we have worked with on this project has been really fantastic. So just a pre-thank you to all of our speakers and all of our community partners. So with that, the next agenda item is a FloodSavvy demo, but I just wanted to pause and if anybody have any questions, I guess either specifically about the national water model or the project that has got us here today before we dive into that demo. At this point, if anybody has a question live, you can just use the raise your hand feature and kind of come off mic, or you can just drop it in the chat. I'll just give it that just 1 second, and if not, we can move over. Awesome. Okay, we will move on then. So our next agenda item is I'm going to come off screen share and I'm going to hand it over to our collaborators from Quasi, who are going to do a live demo of our FloodSavvy. And again, with that Q&A, while Tony and Irene are presenting, if you wouldn't mind just putting any questions that you have in the chat, and then afterwards we are definitely going to pause for a Q&A period. So we will anyway save any live questions for that time. Awesome. So with that, Irene and Tony, over to you both. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves as well. Thank you.
Yes. Just make sure I'm sharing the correct screen. You guys can all see.
Yes. That looks
awesome.
great.
Fantastic. So hello, everyone. My name is Tony Castronova. I'm the lead of research at Quasi, and along with me is Irene Garusi-Najad, who's a research scientist at Quasi as well. And we will be giving just a quick overview of the core capabilities of the FloodSavvy resource that was developed as part of the project. It'll be pretty high level, but hopefully we'll have some time for questions right after. Okay. So just to reiterate, like the one of the goals here was to provide easy access to this publicly available modeled series of model data products from the National Water Model. These data are pretty large. They've been used quite a bit in the science community for various types of research, but they remain a little bit challenging to work with, and I guess maybe a little bit might be an understatement. They're challenging to work with. So our goal was to really lower that barrier so that a community could look at data for local rivers very easily and just have it at their fingertips. When you go to the application, which is floodsavvy.quasi.io, it's live. Anybody can do this right now. You are presented with this disclaimer, and the purpose of this is just to remind people that this is a research project. It does provide access to a lot of publicly available data and some operational data, but in no way should be interpreted as a replacement for official guidance or use in like critical emergency decision scenarios. We see this as a complement to existing NOAA services like the NWIPS portal that Kristen mentioned earlier, and there will be a little presentation on that later as well. But we're going to skip through the acknowledgement. So the homepage here gives us a kind of a sneak peek at some of the core capabilities that we'll cover these in more detail. That's this little slideshow up here at the top. So we'll scroll right past that. I just want to highlight the 6 regions that were already mentioned. These were our communities that we worked with through the co-development process to create this application. So some of them are here, many of them are here, and hopefully you'll see some new features that you haven't seen before. But working with them, we were able to figure out what their needs were, prototype things, and then continue to work to revise these and get the application hopefully to meet their needs. We've isolated our work to those 6 communities because the amount of effort that goes into making all these data available and all of that is just not at the scale where we would release it much wider immediately. But there's no reason why this couldn't be expanded to other locations in the future. Okay. The other thing I want to just highlight here is that there's some details that or some links here that will provide or move you to other areas of the website that give you more information about the individual regions or other resources and such. So most of the exciting stuff is happening on the map interface, and there's 2 ways for us to get there. One is we can just select one of these regions. So I'll go ahead and select Roaring River. And it brings us to a map. Whoops. There we go. A map interface. And the goal here is to provide or to really draw your eyes to the specific community of interest. So anywhere that's kind of shaded darker is we're not providing access to data in those locations. It's not that there is data available, but we aren't providing it through this portal right now. But anywhere inside the non-shaded watershed boundary or community boundary is where we have data. And we have a number of layers here that can be toggled on and off. So, points of interest that are provided by each community. So things like locations of parks or offices, as well as different sub-watersheds and rivers and such like that can be turned on and off. We can also navigate to different regions through this menu up here at the top. And I'm going to go down to Springfield Greene County. And we'll use this as kind of our example for today. Okay, so this is just another region. So most of the the work happens at the river level, right? Or most of the features happen at the river level. So the first thing we'll do is we can zoom in and select any river of interest, and you can see if we highlight over these, we get some information about what these rivers are. We can also search. So Irene and I were looking at some rivers yesterday, and we saw there's this park, Ritter Spring Park. Ritter Spring Park. There's a river down here that was kind of interesting. So we're able to zoom to the location of interest for us and let these layers load. And we can see there are some layers here that have been provided by the community. But what we're really interested in is just this base layer says Ritter Spring Park, and in particular, this Little Sac River. So I'm gonna go ahead and select that. The first thing you'll notice when you select that, we have a couple new menu items up here at the top left. These are the 3 primary capabilities that users can interact with. The first one that we'll talk about is we call it historical. But what this really is it's looking at modeled data modeled through the National Water Model predictions that have happened in the past. If you're familiar with the National Water Model, this is the analysis and assimilation configuration of the model. So the initial view, what we have here is we've gone and collected the stream flow for this river for the past 90 days. And that's useful. We can also adjust the time range though. So these data go back pretty far. But let's go back. Let's just go back to say like February. And I think we'll have like some time at the end for questions. So if you want to put your hand down, we'll come back to you. Thanks. So if I go ahead and apply that, we'll just go ahead and query these data. These data are made possible through another Cairo project where the data is stored in BigQuery, which is why it's possible to access these data so quickly. A relatively new feature that we have is the ability to view these graphs in full screen mode so we can get a better idea of what we're looking at. Here we see a number of different storm events or presumably storm events that have happened in the spring and early summer. But it's hard to identify if these are like significant storms or if this is something that happened in the past. We could look at a more historic data or more modeled data in the past. But we've also recently added this, what we're calling historical quantiles. These are quantile ranges of modeled flows from the version 3 retrospective run. So 40 years of data. We've taken all that data and aligned it based on day of year and computed the various quantiles related to each of the flows at that time. So we get some kind of seasonality, some expectation if things are higher than normal, are they lower than normal, are they typical? And these categories are actually derived from what the USGS uses for their Water Watch. Is it called Water Watch or Water Watch program? We don't have the numbers displayed here, but the green area is actually the lower bound is the 25th percentile and the upper bound is the 75th percentile. And then, above that is the 76th to 90th, and then above that is the 90th or 91st and higher. But these are translated into above normal, normal, below normal, much below normal. So we can see that obviously that some of these peak flows are happening where much above normal flow conditions. This was in response to providing some sort of context for, when you look at these plots, the communities were having trouble understanding, like, well, I don't know if this is a large amount of water or a small amount of water. And this is hoping to get us closer in that direction to understand what typical flows have looked like in the past. Again, these are modeled flows, so this is not based on observations. Okay, so I'm going to minimize that, and we'll move right on to the forecast plot. Oh, I guess before we move on, there are the ability to download these data in a CSV format, so comma separated format or JSON, so you can work with the raw data, create whatever visualizations, bring them into Excel, whatever you want to do from there. So the forecast, similarly, we're going out and hitting a web service here established by the Cairo project, and we're querying back the medium range for a streamflow forecast that's created by the National Water Model. What we end up getting back are a number of different time series. I think there's 6 of them. So let's move this back into full screen mode. What we're actually looking at here is the average of all of them. And the reason this was done is to remain consistent with what is being displayed on the NWIPS interface. So this is the average of all of the forecasted flows. Instead of showing 6 of them, we're just showing the mean. We can also turn on our historical quantile so we can get a better idea of, how significant some of these events are. And you can see here that without these quantiles, this peak, it looks like it's quite alarming, perhaps. And this is happening, actually, this is looking out, is it 10 days from now? We turn on our quantiles and we see that, yes, it is above normal, but it's not significantly out of the ordinary. So there's one other thing I want to highlight on here, and that is I mentioned that we actually get back 6, I believe, for the medium range forecast. We get back a number of different predictions. Instead of showing you all of those, what we've decided to do is show the interquartile range, which is the distribution of the middle 50% of the data. So this is the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile of all of the 6 runs, and we're kind of showing how the distribution of the middle of it moves through time. So we can see that the mean in some cases is higher than the distribution of the middle, but in general, it does give you some more context for what these predictions might mean, or the likelihood or your confidence. And in this case, given that we have an average that's significantly higher than the middle of the data, that implies that we must have at least one or maybe more than one prediction that are substantially higher than the others to move the average up. Again, this data can be downloaded. We do have legends on both of these. You can turn on and off to take a look at what these time series mean. I'm going to turn off the forecast plot real quickly. We'll keep this guy up for now. While I show the last major feature, which is the flood scenario testing capability. So if we choose this flood map button and we move this guy around over here, we'll see these flood maps appearing, these flood extents. These flood extents are pre-computed for every river at regular intervals using the height above nearest drainage methodology and some publicly available code that the NOAA Office of Water Prediction has made available. It is very experimental, and it should be interpreted as such, but it does give you an idea of what might happen given various flow conditions. So if we're looking over here, we have this, what is about 10,000 cubic feet per second. We can drag this bar up near that number. And okay, they're pre-computed, so we're not gonna have the exact number, but this gives us an idea of what that flood extent could have looked like. Height above nearest drainage is based purely on a digital elevation model. This is not doing any kind of hydraulic routing or any kind of crazy stuff like that. So it would be an approximation. But this is something that that we could take a look at, and kind of a community member would be able to go and take a look at what actually happened. And see how accurate that is. The 300 CFS or cubic feet per second example, that was actually, I don't know if you remember, that's actually what is forecast in a few days. This is what that extent might look like. I'm going to turn off the historical plot. There's one last feature I want to show is the ability to select multiple rivers. So if we select multiple rivers, we should be able to view the flood maps and how they intersect with one another. Did that one not appear? Oh, something's wrong right there. Okay. Well, how they overlap with one another. That was working a second ago. You have to trust me on that. Here, let's just clear all the features and try it again. Oh no. Okay. Well, I guess things can never go super smoothly. But you'll be able to see how the various flood maps intersect with one another. We do limit that to four reaches because if you did notice when we select one of these and we select another one, let's grab one upstream here. We're locking it down to a distance of, or an elevation above the hand stage. So this would be 7 feet of hand stage. The flows as you get further apart, those stages can vary quite a bit. So we don't have that. Okay, so just moving on real quickly, there's a few other resources that we have, more information about how to use FloodSavvy and scenarios for having people test it and maybe even teach someone how to use the system. There will be videos coming to provide more context to those as well. We have links to community narratives. This is a great place to go if you want to learn more about any of these specific communities. It's not loading. Any of these specific communities, their needs, some of the knowledge gaps they have and such. And then we have resources for the NWIPs, how to use the NWIP service. And I think Emma and others will be going through this in more detail in a moment, so I won't talk about this. And then finally, we have some about and contact, talks a little bit more about why we're doing this, how we're funded, the process, and then the contact, who we are. I did have the privilege of talking about this, but the effort, what we're looking at here is made possible through a much larger group. And this doesn't even show our external collaborators. So with that, I will stop because I think I'm probably getting close to overtime if I'm not already.
No, I think we're good for time. Thank you for that. And I have seen some questions rolling in the chat, which are, I think, sort of getting addressed there. But at this point, I did see we had a hand up earlier. If folks have any questions that they'd like to answer live, if you wouldn't mind just using the raise your hand feature, and you can come off mic, or you can put your questions in the chat and we'll start hitting those. But this is sort of just an open time if you have any questions specifically about FloodSavvy, the development process. Also for our 6 community folks, I think FloodSavvy looks a bit different since the last time you saw it. So we're also kind of curious if you have any questions or feedback on that as well. So let's pause to see if we have any live questions. Otherwise, we can start hitting the ones that we've seen in the chat.
Hi, Christine.
Hi.
This is Ravinder here. I have a question. So you have 6 cases. So for a new site, how you develop this flowchart, like the steps to replicate it.
I'm sorry, it was a little hard to hear you. What was the question?
Okay. So you have 6 cases there that you're illustrating. And if I'm interested in some other side, how should I follow these steps? Like, do you have any steps like that you
Gotcha. Okay, so the question is, I guess, are you asking from like the community engagement part, like how did we go about bringing on a new site, or more from like the development side of like physically, technically, how would you add a new site, or both?
kind of both.
Okay, so on our website, there's a couple of things that we have. One is we have a documented, we call it our resource narrative, which kind of documents the overall process of how we went from identifying that, number one, there was even a need for something like FloodSavvy, which kind of is more about a bit of the development process and about how we even determined that this, like, what are the features that FloodSavvy needed and things like that. So we do have that available. I don't know, Emma or Danielle, if you just have like a quick link you could put in the chat to that. We'll showcase this later. We do have a study website which has all of these. In terms of the technical development piece, I think that's something that Irene and Tony do have a couple of, it's sort of elements of it. I don't think there's anything that documents the entirety of FloodSavvy. Maybe Tony, you could comment on that, but I do know that there are some like a GitHub repository and things like that, which do have pieces of the code for some of the elements about how they were retrieving and working with some of this data. And then I guess sort of going to talk about this later more too, but we would very much love to continue working on FloodSavvy and expand it. We are still trying to, really just the limiting factor is funding. So we have a couple of avenues we're trying to pursue now, but we are very open to partnerships. Like if folks have a little bit of money and they're just, hey, you just want to add one area and you would like to maybe talk to our team about how we could kind of add this to an area of your interest, or you're just interested in seeing what opportunities might arise in the future. We're very much open to collaborations. We're very excited about the work that we've done. So that's sort of a bit of a long and a short answer of, for the collaborative development effort, we do have that documented, and also we're happy to follow up and just chat about that. I think we should have some publications coming out in the next year or so, but obviously that takes a while, so I can't necessarily say when those will be available. And then on the technical side, maybe Tony or Irene, if you have any quick, maybe, I know there was a few links shared in the chat, but if you have anything maybe specific about more of the development side.
Yeah, I can give a very quick answer. All of our code is free and open source. So if someone wanted to take this and use it, they can do that. We can provide some guidance. I think that would be a lot of effort, though. I think that would be a significant amount of effort. If we wanted to just add a new location or a set of locations, since we've done quite a bit of research in designing this whole thing, we wouldn't have to necessarily add new capabilities. We would just have to collect the GIS data, make sure it's styled correctly, and then the largest or the most heavy lift would be computing those historic quantiles and then pre-generating all the flood maps, which is a significant amount of effort, but the process has gotten a lot better. We actually, if you want, we can talk about this in more detail at a different time, but the way we do that is we have a containerized, we containerized a bunch of the OWP's flood inundation code, and we spawn this up on Cloud Run instances to generate a series of flood maps specific to each river, convert them to cloud optimized geotiffs, store them in BigQuery, and then we query and render them. But the data prep was really the only lift at this point.
Hey, Tony, this is Ravinder again. Okay, so I'm just wondering if you guys have any Jupyter notebooks or something like that that people can follow if they want to do like all the GIS work for their field sites.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Great question. We do. They're not available on the website right now, and I think that's something that we should probably make accessible. They're available through other means at Quasi, like, oh, we have this, in our HydroShare system, or over here in this this area for example notebooks for working with national water model data and products. But almost everything that we're looking at here was prototyped in Jupyter notebooks and then translated into kind of a more formal code. So we do have that, like even computing the quantiles, like the whole methodology for everything, which actually is incredibly important because there's people on this call that probably want to look at how we did that to make sure we did it correctly, right? And that would clearly, show our process, and hopefully someone would help us improve the process. But yes, the notebooks do in fact exist, and I think they just need to be cleaned up. But that's something that we could certainly prioritize in the future, getting those out there.
Okay, thank you, Tony. And I have one more question. For the forecasting part, what is the source of meteorological data and how far do you go in the future? Thank you.
Oh, that's such a good question. Irene. So I'm going to pass it to Irene, but we are not actually running the forecast. We're using the forecasted product that's publicly accessible or made publicly available by NOAA. But Irene, do you know offhand what they're using for forcing?
I think I just responded back to that message on chat. Yeah, and through the links that we know and references that we know about what are the forcings, they use different forcings for different forecasts. Since we are using the medium resolution, I think there is a blend forecast value, forcing values coming out of a model. They would call it NWM, I think, and there are two links that you can check out and read more about what are the forcing data that they use for their forecast. Unfortunately, I do not have more information about that because we are just looking at the model outputs, not anything about the inputs to actually be sure about what is the type of the forcing data that they use. Yeah.
Awesome.
But
Thank you.
NOAA provides that information on at least two links that I shared in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you. So for the sake of time, we're going to get the one last question we have live here, and then we'll also have some more Q&A periods. So feel free to keep your questions coming in the chat. We're happy to try to respond to those as we go. And these are really great. So thank you all for your questions. Over to Francisco.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just curious about like how do you communicate the uncertainty to users? I understand that one of the advantages of the national water model is that you can have predictions at the commodity level. So a lot of these ridges are ungauged locations, but still because of the model we can see historical trends and all those kind of like bands that you showed. But still, there is this underlying uncertainty about like, well, this is an ungauged location. How do you go about that? How do you communicate that uncertainty to the communities and the value of this data?
That's a conversation we've had a lot, and I think I'm going to give it over to Tony maybe to take a stab at that.
Yeah, we might need to take that one offline just in the sense of time, but we've had that conversation quite a bit with several people at the Office of Water Prediction too. And the one thing I'll say is there are a variety of these little question or little info icons. In some of them, I don't know if it's there necessarily, but we've at one point we did have some discussion about like how do you interpret this information. I'm not sure if we have any on our resources page. Irene, I don't know if you could speak any more towards that, but we have had this conversation about how do we want to make sure it's clear, or as clear as it can be, what someone is looking at and how they should interpret that information. Because like you said, ungauged, it's great to have data at ungauged reaches, but you don't know if it's good or bad, right?
Yeah. I think at some point we decided to update these resource pages just to put in a plain language how those uncertainty that Tony was showing a little bit about more into the technical view of the uncertainty by showing those quantiles and IQR values, just to add a little bit of context about how uncertain the model outputs could be. But the scope of the tool was not to actually assess the uncertainty and be able to speak about the how uncertain or how we can quantify the uncertainty of these data sets. It's just to maybe streamline the access to the national water model so that we can better as a community look at these results or compare it with some local information and local data set that each community might that themselves own or have to then be able to assess that part of the uncertainty.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, I think we'll be making a lot of emails available as well. So if you do have any like follow-up things, we're always very happy to jump on a quick call and kind of, do a more in-depth chat with anybody. So just, I think I will be making mine available, but basically if you email anybody on the team, we will make sure that email gets to the right person. So with that, I want to move us on to our next bit of our presentation. So as Tony kind of hinted at in his overview of FloodSavvy, we also have created a national water model tutorial. So we're going to pass it over to our other team members, Daniela and Emma, to give us a walkthrough of this resource. And Daniela and Emma, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves as well. Over to you.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Emma. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniela. I work as a senior research associate at GRI, and I'll be going over a process for creating one of the resources we developed alongside FloodSavvy, which is our national water model tutorial. I'll be co-presenting this section with my colleague Emma, who will walk you through each section in a moment. So this tutorial is a beginner-friendly step-by-step guide of the National Water Model, and we designed it specifically for first-time users with the assumption that people utilizing this resource wouldn't know anything about the model, where it comes from, how to access it, how to interpret its data. And we cover what the National Water Model is, the practical questions it can help you answer, how to access it through the National Water Protection Service website, what kinds of data it produces and how to access that data, and a glossary of key terms and additional resources. It is available as a PDF, and you'll see that there are also short video walkthroughs in some sections. And I want to start by briefly explaining why we saw the need for this type of resource. As Kristen explained, throughout our project, we found that many water decision makers, including emergency managers, planners, local officials, had little familiarity with the model. And even though there are a lot of resources out there and tutorials, they're often written or designed for a technical audience with advanced hydrology knowledge rather than beginner level users who may come from diverse professional backgrounds or with different levels of hydrology expertise. So we wanted to create a guide that could lower the entry barrier for this type of potential users. And for example, here we start by providing a very low complexity overview of what the model is, and that you can access it through the Water Protection Service website. And in the next page, we then explain what data it uses to make its simulations, because we also found that given the abundance of data and models out there, it was really important to build trust in the reliability of the model and how it all comes together. And we also go through what it can simulate and what predictions it can make. And we try to present this not as like, here's a data set, but really, here's a question that you may have that this data set could help you answer, which is our next section. So this is because one of the gaps that we identified in existing tutorials and resources was that none of them were tailored to community level users and their questions. And we heard repeatedly in our interviews that users wanted resources that could help them answer questions based on their local needs, like is my region forecasted to flow, or which locations could be most affected. So instead of organizing the tutorial around the data sets or the model components themselves, we try to organize it around questions that were relevant for the participating communities, which are all shown here. And really, the heart of the tutorial is a step-by-step walkthrough. And given that the goal was to create a one-on-one guide, you'll notice that we rely heavily on screenshots of everything you'll see on your screen as you access the model. And we also try to provide plain language descriptions of what icons and colors mean and how to interpret hydrographs, how to access real-time forecasts and retrospective data. We just didn't want to assume that people would intuitively know how to find these features or use these features. And I think from my perspective, as someone who doesn't come from a hydrology background and doesn't know much hydrology beyond this project, I think it was a good perspective to have, because if something didn't make sense for me, it was likely not going to make sense for the type of user that we had in mind for this tutorial. So this is all I have, and now Emma will walk you through each section in more detail.
Thanks, Daniela. So this step-by-step guide within the National Water Model tutorial, beginning on page 6, is split into 5 sections. And as Daniela mentioned, the first 3 sections also have a corresponding tutorial video that walks through the steps shown in the PDF. So if we scroll down a little bit here, we see that this first section orients you on the National Water Prediction Service homepage, which is called NWIP's by its acronym, and is where the National Water Model can be accessed. This section describes how to navigate the NWIP's map interface and provides an overview of the layers and the datasets that you can explore. And when you first land on this homepage shown here, you'll see that there are many colorful dots, and these are the locations of river gauges throughout the US. So in the next section, in section 2, we walk through how you can access observed streamflow and water level data after selecting one of these gauges. And then you can see that these hydrographs produced by the gauges also indicate which flood category the streamflow fits into, which is useful for monitoring potential flood risk and providing some understanding of what normal conditions may look like. And these flood categories, as well as the flood impact statements, are only available at gauge locations. Now, while NWIPS defaults to showing observational gauge data, you can also view simulated streamflow forecasts up to 30 days in advance from the National Water Model, even for ungauged rivers. So in section 3, we can show you how to access these National Water Model datasets within NWIPS, and there's 2 ways about doing that. So the first option is selecting a gauge and viewing that on hydrograph here. And then the second is by activating the National Water Model layer to view predictions for areas not covered by gauges. And this National Water Model data could be helpful for assessing streamflow patterns and flood risk, particularly on rivers that have limited sources of water data. And then going on to section 4, the tutorial now goes back in time and describes a few options to access National Water Model's 40-year retrospective data. This data is most useful for exploring how the model would have performed at a point in time before it was developed in 2016. However, accessing and interpreting this dataset requires some knowledge in data science and modeling. And then finally, in section 5, we walk through the flood inundation mapping service, which is available on NWIPS and shows where flooding may occur only if water exceeds certain levels. And this is useful for identifying possible impacts to infrastructure and other assets during a flood event. And at the moment, this service covers 60% of the US with plans for further expansion next year. So overall, our goal with this tutorial was to give a practical entry point into the National Water Model, whether you're monitoring current conditions, assessing flood risk, or planning for future scenarios. And we encourage you to check it out and share the tutorial with others who might be interested and would benefit from its information. And I've shared a link in the chat to it, but you can also find it on FloodSavvy and our project website.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma and Daniela. That was fantastic. And just to note too, one of our other motivations for creating the National Water Model tutorial is obviously FloodSavvy is really piloted and geared towards the 6 different regions that we have focused on. But hopefully the goal is if you were interested in finding information available outside of those 6 areas, the National Water Model tutorial should give you another way to try to access some of that same information. Because again, all of the information that we're using on FloodSavvy does come directly from the National Water Model. So with that, actually, I just wanted to pause again quickly if there were any maybe questions specific to the National Water Model tutorial, or maybe any just lingering questions that popped up about FloodSavvy in general before we move on. Our next step is we're going to hear from 5 of the 6 of our different community partners who helped us develop FloodSavvy. So any questions? I see a hand. Francisco.
Yeah, quick question regarding the access to the retrospective data, and I saw like the tools that are in the tutorial. Have you considered also some sort of like training sessions on that specific aspect? Are there already some of them, and then I'm not aware of them?
That's a good question. I know that NOAA offers like office hour trainings. I'm not off the top of my head familiar with any specific to retrospective data. Irene or Tony or anybody on the call, does anybody off the top of your head know of any of those? I know we have a couple of Jupyter notebooks from phase 2. We had some folks interested in retrospective data, which is in the tutorial, I believe, and is made available, but is anybody aware of any specific trainings?
I am not aware of any trainings from NOAA or what they are using for their trainings, but outside of NOAA, I would say those Jupyter notebooks that Quasi had created have been used for several years throughout different workshops and training programs as being kind of like a tutorial-based Jupyter notebooks for students or other researchers how to access the retrospective data. And those are openly available. If you're interested, we can definitely share them with you.
Yeah. And again, that offer still stands. So if you have a particular thing and you want to sit down with anybody from our team afterwards, we're more than happy to chat.
Hi, Christine. This is
Hi.
Ravindra.
How are you?
Christine and Irene. Yeah, I would really appreciate if you guys can share the Jupyter notebooks. But I do want to make a comment. Thank you for doing this. This is very, very important and very meaningful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Glad to hear it. I mean, we think it's really awesome. So we're glad to hear so many other folks are enjoying it as well. All right. Were there any other last minute questions, or I guess anybody from the team? Am I missing anything maybe that popped up in the chat that we wanted to address? Okay, awesome. I guess with that, let me share my screen again. All right, so now we're going to get into what I consider to be the most exciting part of our presentation. Today, we have 5 of our 6 community partners lined up who are going to share a couple of slides. I guess for your speakers, I'll be screen sharing this entire time, so if you could just let me know next slide when you're ready. But in order, I'm gonna, again, also for our speakers, I'm just gonna do a little introduction here, but if you wouldn't mind just giving a little bit more of an introduction to yourself when you jump in. But in order, we're gonna first have Kyle Katz from Two Rivers Ottaquiche Regional Commission in Vermont, then Todd Melkus from the City of DeSoto, Margot Gia from the Wyndham Regional Commission in Vermont, Mike Busacruz from Roaring River State Park in Missouri, and then Kellen Appleton from the Mount Ascutney Regional Commission. So with that, first up, we have Kyle Katz. So Kyle, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute, introducing yourself a little bit, and then just giving me a shout when you're ready. And then I guess for the rest of our audience, again, we're going to pause for Q&A after each of these speakers. So if you have anything burning, just feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, just feel free to raise your hand afterwards and we'll get to all your questions. All right, thank you. So over to you, Kyle.
Excellent. Thank you, Kristen. And just want to make sure everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you great.
Awesome. Okay. I really appreciate being able to participate in this event and look forward to sharing some background on our region in ways that I see FloodSavvy being applicable in our work and for the towns that we work with. So a little background on the Two Rivers Ottaquiche Regional Commission and myself. I'm a regional planner with the Two Rivers Ottaquiche Regional Commission. We are one of 11 regional plan commissions in Vermont, and we provide technical assistance to the 30 towns in our region. We support towns in a number of ways. Flooding oriented, this includes flood mitigation and emergency management. We also support towns with updates to flood regulations and development of hazard mitigation grant applications and other ways as well. What you can see on the screen on the left-hand side is a map of our region. You can see that there are a number of rivers, so flooding plays a big role in our region, and it's the biggest hazard that we face year in and year out. On the right-hand side is the largest river that goes through our region. That's a photo of the White River, the main stem that goes down into the Connecticut. You can go to the next slide, Kristen. So just a little more on background on who we are. Again, we're one of 11 regional planning commissions, and we provide a lot of floodplain and flood mitigation support. And given the number of rivers in our region, it's topographically, it's very mountainous. And so we have lots of mountain streams that go down to river valleys. So flooding is a big component for many of our towns that are located in those river valleys. Our towns vary in size from small hamlets of 500 or 600 people to the largest town, which is Hartford, of 10,000. Kristen, we can go to the next slide. So some water-related challenges, much like the rest of Vermont, our region has experienced frequent and severe flood events over the recent past. The most significant and recent events include Tropical Storm Irene from 2011 and the July 2023 flood event. Those, among other flood events in the recent past, have resulted in increased damage to homes, infrastructure, and other facilities during these high flood events. We're also seeing more erosion along our stream and riverbanks. Given the topography, this is becoming a more prescient concern across Vermont, and it's leading to the undercutting of development over time. And we're also seeing, as a result of increased precipitation and more saturated soils, more frequent landslides, particularly along our rivers and streams. And the images on the right-hand side just show some of the severity of the recent flood events that we've had in our state. You can go to the next slide. We do have information gaps. We only have 4 stream gauges throughout our region. This makes the forecasting of future floods and future flood events very challenging. We also, many of our towns are staffed by volunteers, and this makes it challenging in terms of local capacity to conduct long-term planning to address future flood risks. And finally, we have very limited mapping. Many of our FEMA flood maps are from the 1970s, 80s, or 90s. And the maps are static, often they're paper. And so they don't provide a lot of detailed information on where flooding might occur. We can go to the next slide. And so some ways in which we see FloodSavvy being applicable for our purposes. One, it can be used to flag areas most at risk to future flooding. We can use that modeling tool available in FloodSavvy to look at historical flood events, where did we have high flood flows before, and what might that look like in the future, to really pinpoint some of the hot spots that we see in our region. And then also the format simplifies the national water model, especially for folks on the ground in our towns and our communities that don't come with a strong hydrological background or strong flood mapping understanding. It makes that data much more accessible for emergency managers and community officials. We can go to the next slide. Oh, I think we had one there we are. So what are the impacts that FloodSavvy will have on our work? Both the forecasting and historical data can be used in a lot of the planning processes our towns conduct right now, such as in their town plan updates and their hazard mitigation planning initiatives. This is just an additional tool at their disposal for undertaking these long-term planning processes. And then Two Rivers, we can evaluate the stream flow forecasts on river and stream reaches in the region. And this can, as I mentioned previously, support the identification and prioritization of high impact areas. So it just gives us that level of data over time that helps us to make those prioritizations. And then again, using that historical data as a benchmark for future flood forecasting. So seeing where we had high flows in the past, maybe that July 2023 flood event, and looking at how that might, what those flows might look like in future forecasting.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Yeah. So I was just wondering if anybody had any questions specific to Kyle or the work from the Two Rivers Regional Commission. And I'm not really able to see the chat, so I'm wondering, Emma or Daniela, if we have seen anything important pop up.
Looks like we do have one question in the chat. That says, could you share how local communities value this flood information and how much trust they place in it?
Well, maybe that's a question for Kyle. If you wouldn't mind taking a stab.
Well, short answer is it depends on the community.
Yeah.
Given the mapping that we have in place right now, there are two levels of mapping that we have in Vermont. We have the FEMA flood maps and river corridor maps. Towns can conduct more detailed mapping if they have the money for it. In our region, I don't think any towns have gone ahead and done that. So we really rely on these static river corridor maps and flood maps for our flood data. And given the age of those FEMA maps, we hear very often how they don't align with where the flooding actually occurs.
Mhm.
And so I'm just thinking in terms of communities and how they value this information. I think it's just an additional tool at their disposal.
Yeah.
It comes down to how open and receptive the community is to flood regulations and looking at protecting the areas around rivers and streams, how receptive they are to being proactive about that and using all the data at their disposal.
Thank you. All right. Was there anything else that popped up?
And then looks like there is a second question. Are there any specific adaptation actions you're hoping to implement to having new insights from FloodSavvy?
I think just initially making sure towns know this is available and it's a tool that they can use for their local needs. I think that seeing the quantiles is extremely helpful, especially for people that don't have a strong flood mapping background, to be like, is this a normal level? What am I looking at here? And seeing if it's in the green, like it makes it very simple and straightforward to see, okay, things, at least kind of on a higher napkin level are within a normal range. But incorporating it into some of our planning processes with towns, I think would be a good start.
That's great. And I think maybe that's something, I don't know if we made that point super clear to the audience, but the quantiles and the different colored bands, that's actually a new feature that was added. So we did a bunch of user testing around August with folks just to on the latest version of FloodSavvy. And that is something that we heard a lot was how do we contextualize, like you see a peak. How do you know if that's a normal peak for your region or an alarming peak, or how do you contextualize it? So that's what the sort of a semi-surprise during today's presentation was. One of the ways that we decided to address that was adding those colored bands to try to give you a sense of, okay, in the past, was this relatively normal? Was this high, etc.? So that's great that that's feedback. And that's something that for all of our speakers, there will be an email going out specifically where we're hoping for more feedback on that from you all. But that's great to hear that that's at least a step in the right direction for communicating them.
It certainly jumped out to me immediately of like, this is incredibly helpful for someone just, trying to figure out the tool and saying, okay, this looks normal based on, the quantiles make it very clear.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I think that's a great note for us to move on from. And again, please keep those questions coming. We should have some time at the end if there's any sort of maybe summative questions over the rest. So our next speaker will be Todd Melkus from the city of DeSoto in Missouri. So Todd, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute, maybe introducing yourself a little bit more and then just giving me the cues for when you're ready for me to move your next slide.
Sure. Is my volume good? Can you guys hear me well?
Yep, we can hear you great.
First of all, I'd like to thank the team here for the opportunity to work on this project. I think it's going to be beneficial to the city and the community and hopefully potential users in the future that can take advantage of the ease of use. So my background, I'm Todd Melkus. I'm the city manager of the city of DeSoto. Luckily, by default, I'm also the floodplain administrator. And I also get the role of, when we have emergency events, to make the decision of having people evacuate for flooding events, et cetera. So I pay attention in much detail to the creek and the level of the creek and the forecasted events. So this project, like I said, is just hopefully going to add more data to our tool belt to be able to help warn citizens when we do have events, and keep everybody safe in town. So if you want to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So DeSoto is a medium-sized town. We have about 6,500 people. Of our 2,600 structures, about 10% of those are in the floodplain. And so a lot of people in the town honestly aren't even aware of that, because of just the in the last decade, knock on wood, our last big event was in 2013 and 16. And although we've had a few events where the creek has been at flood level, there has not been any damages to homes or any evacuations required. And so, at this time, we're just the challenge with our community, which I'm sure is the same with a lot of these other communities that are be speaking today, is getting people knowledgeable on the hazards. And tools like this is what we like to get out there, because a lot of people are intimidated when they start looking at some of the national water models websites, et cetera. There's a lot of data there, et cetera. So I think if we can get people to just pay attention and look at some of these forecasted events, it'll help us be more prepared, and it'll be easier on our emergency services when we do have to take action during these events. So like I said, we deal mostly with one major stream. Although we are a city within Jefferson County that obviously deals with flooding with major rivers, Mississippi, Merrimack River, Big River. But in our town, the main focus is the Joachim Creek. And as you can see in these pictures, flooding is nothing new. Some community members think that it is new and it's our fault because of growth, et cetera. But as you can see with the old pictures here, that we've been dealing with this problem for a long time. The biggest issue is we have an extremely large watershed, and when the creek gets to the city limits, it is choked down drastically. And therefore, during heavy rain events, the creek rises and falls very quickly. And so that is one of the biggest challenges we have is, since it's not a major river, it's almost impossible to forecast how these rain events are going to affect the creek and if it's going to cause flooding, et cetera. So we rarely get warning. We obviously, there's been times where I've seen it where there has been no severe thunderstorm watches in the area, and we have had an extreme heavy rain geographically south of the city. And within 2 hours, the creek jumped almost 8 feet and was bank full, and we were having to get people out of the parks, et cetera. They were just literally standing there, just taking pictures, thinking that, this is not a dangerous situation because it wasn't raining here in town. But it's something that we struggle with, and the forecasting is the biggest challenge. And so having this data and these forecasted events, along with, we are lucky enough, we do have 2 stream gauges in the area. One is a USGS gauge, and the other one that we've recently got implemented with Mr. Becker with the MOHIC program. And so that just gives us that much more data and to be able to try to be prepared for flooding events when we do get the heavy rains. So like I've been kind of discussing, forecasting flash flood events is extremely challenging. And for those of you that deal with flashy streams and not just rivers, you guys know that is very difficult when it comes to emergency planning. And in our town, one of our major crossings is, you can see in this picture, this is just one of our 2 ways that people can get across the creek and out of town. And as you can see, with the boat currently on the street in this picture, that when we have flooding events, that can be an issue. Not only that, our two firehouses are on the west side of the creek. So again, when we have flooding issues, it's difficult to be able to get to people to assist them, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just a city issue. We obviously, it's a coordinated effort with us and our emergency services to handle these type of events. And luckily, we have a lot of educated people in the district, and they know when we have events what to do. But again, it's just very easy for it to sneak up on us, and the biggest challenge is just trying to keep people informed and so keep them out of harm's way when we do have these events. And so with FloodSavvy, I think, like I said, the historical stream flow data, of course, we have that as well on our stream gauges, et cetera. But the forecasting, and I think the key is going to be the ease of use of this program. So our goal is to get this out to the community, let them get used to this program to where they can just click on here very easily, see if there's any forecasted flooding events or forecasted events where we feel the stream may increase in height. So this forecasted data can just be very critical. And we've been learning a lot over the years. And I think, like you said, along with FloodSavvy, along with USGS, MOHIC, and all these other programs that we're working for, it's really just about data and learning which watersheds affect the creek the most, which rain events, depending on the time of year, how it affects the creek, et cetera. So, we just look forward to more and more data. And again, it's always going to be a challenge with flash floods, but the more we're educated and the more we can educate the citizens, then we hope the safer they can be. In this picture here, like I was kind of speaking about earlier, when we had that event this spring, the people were in the park where you can see this pavilion, and again, the creek rose almost 8 feet, and it was just about an hour, and it didn't even rain a drop here in DeSoto, and so it's a challenge because not everybody is educated on the dangers of how our creek reacts to heavy rain events, et cetera. And this just proves that you can see how inundated that this park can get. And this is our largest park. Hundreds of people walk and take their kids there every day and walk their dogs, et cetera. So again, it's just about education. And it's as we all know, a lot of people have flood amnesia. When we don't have a heavy flood for a number of years, people don't think that it can happen. And unfortunately, it can happen very quickly. So it's just about educating, and we hope this program assists us along with other communities to be able to give better warning systems for residents and keep everybody safe.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. That was fantastic. Those pictures right at the end. I mean, that paints a picture. I mean, picture's worth 1,000 words. I think that was really fantastic too. I think that's one of the use cases that it just kind of over the past couple of years is really illustrating is just the education and outreach piece. Yes, the national water model's got a lot of really complex technical hydrology information, but the power of starting a conversation, just the flood amnesia piece is very real. And that's something that, yes, in your use case and across a lot of other conversations we've had comes up quite a bit. So thank you for highlighting that. I did want to kick it back over to the chat. I'm wondering, Emma, if any questions came in as Todd was speaking or if we had any.
Just having a look. I think Irene popped one in there, asking if you could share the name of the park that I think you referenced in the last slide.
Yeah, it's named Walters Park.
Thank you.
That was a really powerful example. Not seeing any other questions in the chat. I guess a quick one from my end is, how do you see FloodSavvy and the data that it provides complement those existing sources that you mentioned, like the USGS gauge and the one that MOHIC has installed recently?
Well, I think, like I said, I think the key is the ease of use. And The USGS gauge is very critical to me because it shows 5-minute intervals, data that's just really up to date. And so, but it can be intimidating for some people to look at that and not be able to necessarily look at all the data. And so I just think FloodSavvy is going to be just another tool to add to the tool belt. It's not, some people might prefer it over others, and some people might prefer the more technical sites that have more information. But again, I just hope that it's more user friendly, and I think it'll attract people to be able to at least keep an eye on it for the forecasted events. And if they can use it, even if we just get 5% more people to pay attention, that's still that many more people that are hopefully not going to get in a bad situation.
Thanks. That's really insightful. And that was sort of always our goal too with developing FloodSavvy. It was never meant to be the one singular point that folks are supposed to go to. It's just, again, it's another data point, or maybe it's a starting point, and then you will go to something else. Maybe you'll learn something here and then be able to apply it, or some of those other more technical tools might be more understandable. So thank you for that. To keep us moving along, and next speaker, we have Margot Gia from the Wyndham Regional Commission in Vermont. So Margot, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute, introducing yourself, and then just giving me your cues for when you're ready for me to flip your slides.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Great. So hello, and so my name is Margot Gia, and I'm a regional planner at Wyndham Regional Commission. We, like Two Rivers Ottaquechee that you heard, work with municipalities in southeastern Vermont. We have 27 municipalities that we work with, and I wanted to share sort of that range of size. So our smallest community with a town government is about 126 people. And our largest community, which is Brattleboro, which you see on the little map there, is just about 12,200. So we have a wide range of communities. Most are sort of in that 2,000 or less category. So we're definitely dealing with a lot of communities that rely on a regional planning commission like ours to assist them in a lot of the responsibilities that municipalities have for planning. So we can go to the next slide. So just to kind of give you a context of how Wyndham Regional might work with our communities. So we might help them with flood resiliency planning, project identification, maybe project managing even some of their projects that are on the ground, like upsizing culverts or something to that effect. We work with hazard mitigation planning. We also have a wing of our organization that looks more on the emergency response side of work that towns do, and then assisting with creating town plans and zoning assistance, especially around river corridor bylaws and other regulations. But it's an interesting group of communities that we work with, because I think we have 8 communities that don't even have zoning. And as I said, they range in size from just over 100 to 12,000. And that 12,000 is an outlier in the region. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So what are some of our challenges in our region? And I think what I loved hearing about the 2 previous presentations is the challenges that you heard there are very similar to ones that we experience in our communities. So in our community, we have the lowlands of the Connecticut River Valley on our eastern side. We go into the foothills that lead up onto the western side that would have the Green Mountains. But all of these, whether you're in the lowlands or you're up in the mountains, we have sort of deeper river valleys that have steeper slopes that come down to them. And those small tributaries, they may be small, but boy, they are mighty when it starts to rain. The other thing is that in our whole region, out of those 27 communities, we only have 3 USGS river gauges. 2 of them are on one river and one is on another river. and they're all associated around dams. So most of our rivers are ungauged. Another thing being, I think a lot of communities face this, that we didn't know as much when we were developing our regions. Water power was huge, and our communities built up around water power. And so a lot of our historic development is right around the rivers. And one of our other big challenges is we work with 27 municipalities and 27 mostly volunteer decision-making entities. So very few have, paid staff that are looking at anything related to rivers and being able to monitor them, or even in terms of, having paid staff that are managing the town. So all of our decision bodies are mostly volunteer. And they have a lot of things that they have to have a lot of knowledge about. So that kind of leads to the information gaps where these volunteers are having to make decisions about everything from snow plowing in the winter to emergency management and what happens in our communities. And there's often limited information that these decision-making bodies have on floodplain management. And on top of that, as we've heard from other communities, there's incomplete data that's available that's easy for municipalities to understand. So we can go to the next slide. So how does FloodSavvy then help both us and the communities that we work with? So on the bottom is a community that is a mapping of, you can look at sections of a river that don't have gauges on them and look at model predictions of, okay, if we're in a lower stream flow, this is what the river might look like and how it might access its floodplains. In low river conditions, that's pretty low. But you can then increase the level of the river flow and see on the map how the river changes, and the areas like below in the bottom picture, when does it start to reach out and access the floodplains that are available, if there are floodplains available. So that's a really handy feature that you can sort of show, like, okay, so if we get these really high rain events, this is where we're going to start to see flooding events. This is where your community might have impacts. And that visualization is really important when you're trying to educate and just sort of communicate this information to these volunteer decision-making boards. And then the other piece that other people mentioned is being able to look at the historical stream flow. I don't have the one at the top here shows in 2023, in July of 2023, on July 11th, we had a very large rainstorm that impacted many of our communities, especially up in the mountainous region. And, so they can remember, oh, do you remember the July 2023 storm? And you can show them, okay, so the river was peaking at about this level. So we know that if we're then looking at the forecasted stream flow, that if we're seeing some predictions of, the river levels going up to that height, we might have some problems coming up. And again, it's that visualization key. And what I didn't put in that historical stream flow, which I think was a recently added piece, is we've been talking about those quantiles with the color coding. And I love that feature. And I think that's going to be very helpful too. So how are we going to definitely use this? We are definitely going to work, when we're working with communities and helping them build their hazard mitigation plans, as well as maybe some of their emergency plans, that we can utilize this tool to provide data and conversation points to help stimulate conversation. The other piece is just by being able to use this tool as we're talking with communities, being able to use it as an educational opportunity. And it's the more tools that we have that can kind of simplify the information and make it kind of clear and give a clearer picture to someone who doesn't deal with this on an everyday basis, except for what they see out their window or maybe experiences they're driving down the street. Then that's going to really help them be able to make better decisions in their communities. So we were excited and we were happy to be one of the communities that was working with the FloodSavvy team. And we're just thankful for the opportunity and excited to see where this also continues to go. So thank you.
I say no, thank you. We feel very fortunate to, again, as I mentioned earlier, the pre-thank you that I had is everyone that we have worked with in this project has been basically if I could have waved a magic wand and picked stakeholders, I would have gotten this group. So thank you all for this. And it's also very exciting to hear that you also love the new quantile feature. And that's sort of, I guess, for the whole audience, that sort of exemplifies what we've been working on is that was in response to hey, we want context, let's try something out. And then we get feedback. And that's sort of been the iterative process, is we haven't really jumped ahead and done anything without kind of identifying a need for it first. Okay, and then I guess maybe do we have a few quick questions? Emma, if you could just take a look at the chat and see if Margot had drummed up any questions from the audience.
Yeah, we have one more for the technical side, which I'll probably let Tony and Irene address in the chat. But nothing in the chat here.
Cool. Well, if anything does pop up, please feel free to let us know. Otherwise, I guess for the sake of time, we will keep rolling. So our next speaker is Mike Busacruz from the Roaring River State Park. Mike, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute, introducing yourself, and then just giving me your cues for when you're ready to have me move your slides.
Sure. Like the others have said, really appreciate the opportunity to be involved with this project. My name is Mike Busacruz. I'm the superintendent here at Roaring River State Park. We're a little bit different than the other community showcased today. Our community here at the state park is largely tourists, and we get a lot of them at that every year. So our park here, we are 7 miles south of Cassville, Missouri. We are just shy of 5,000 acres. And then we are surrounded also by the Mark Twain National Forest, and the Missouri Department of Conservation also maintains a large landholding presence around the park. As you can see there on the picture, like a lot of the other communities, we are down here in the Ozark Mountains, and we are in some pretty rough country. And unfortunately for us, everything runs downhill to Roaring River State Parks. As the locals call it, the hollows feed into Roaring River. And one of our other interesting features here that we have at the park is the headwaters of Roaring River State Park is a spring that produces 20.4 million gallons of water each day. And just kind of looking there at that map, you see where the fish hatchery is. That's where that spring is at. You see Sligman Hollow, that feeds into Dry Hollow. We've also got several hollows off Davis Hollows that are further down the park. So we have a lot of these watersheds that feed into Roaring River, and our water runs actually for a very short period of time through the park before exiting into Table Rock Lake. Next slide. So a little bit about us. We host approximately 1.1 million visitors a year. The photo you see there on the right is that most of our visitors enjoy coming to the park and camping along the stream. We have 186 campsites that are located along the Roaring River, and we have 48 lodging units. So one of the things that people don't think about with a state park is that we are much like our own city. So we have an inn on the hill. We have cabins. We have all these sites that we can rent along the stream. We are one of the Midwest premier trout fishing destinations, one of 4 trout fishing destinations in Missouri. So what's interesting about our population is that it's tourists most of the time. They are camping along the river. They're here for recreation. And one of the last things that's on their mind is the weather, is flash flooding potential. And we have to be the eyes and ears for our visitors because of that. So also like a lot of the city's folks today, so we maintain our own water and wastewater facilities. We have a fish hatchery that produces more than 250,000 trout every year for our stream. So it is a Michigan critical piece of infrastructure that we maintain. We've got our own law enforcement presence. So we operate very much like a small city to host our visitors. One of the things we deal with, because we collect a lot of water, is for more than 100 years, we've dealt with flash flooding here at Roaring River. However, our visitors, many of them new, don't understand that. They don't understand the severe weather aspects of our park. So we have to be the eyes and ears for our visitors for these severe weather events. So we monitor the weather year round for events that could cause weather-related issues. Just earlier this week, we had a 1,200-acre wildfire just off the park boundary. We deal with severe weather events down here, flooding events. So you kind of have to be a jack of all trade to work for a state park down in this area. Luckily for us, though, we are supported by a lot of our surrounding partners, and the National Weather Service, I say a lot of times, has our back. They have called me in the middle of the night a lot of times to wake me up and say, hey, do you know that this is coming in? You guys might want to get eyes on this. And we also have a really great local emergency management agency that supports us in our decision making. And as we talked about, Roaring River lies downstream. And like some of the other communities have talked about, that downstream term is not a good thing for us because we have also experienced flooding events where, it may be raining 7 miles up in Cassville. It's completely dry here at Roaring River State Park. And all of a sudden, here's water coming through our Campground 1. Same way, it could be raining to the west of us on Sligman Hollow or Dry Hollow. And all of a sudden, those hollows go from just being large, dry gravel beds to walls of water within minutes that then we are dealing with. So that makes our decision-making here in the parks, it's complex and challenging. We currently do have one USGS gauge. It's located right in the middle of that picture you see there, where you see the F highway. It's right on that bridge, and that gauge is a very Michigan critical lifeline for us for understanding what the stream is doing, because very little water entering into Roaring River can cause big impacts for our campgrounds because they do sit so close to the rivers. And you've got to imagine our tourists, they come in RVs, motorhomes, a lot of them are in tents. A lot of them, when they come, set up all kinds of stuff outside in their campsites, and they aren't mobile very quickly sometimes. So we have to kind of be ahead of making decisions for them based on that gauge. You don't realize how much you begin to rely on a gauge until you don't have it. We had a severe weather event move through the park in May of 2024 that took out that gauge. It was a severe weather straight line wind events, dropped down all kinds of trees throughout the park, in addition to dumping a bunch of rain. So not only were we trying to triage Mother Nature and trees being down, make sure visitors were okay, but also keep an eye on the gauge at the same time. And when the gauge went down, it got real interesting. And then we lost cell phone service. And then it got even more interesting. So you can imagine trying to make decisions with, at any given time of the year, 1,000+ visitors in your park or in your campground, and knowing what decisions you need to make when your gauge is down. So it gets interesting down here sometimes. Next slide. So these two pictures kind of illustrate where Roaring River gets its name from. So these pictures were taken from our webcam. The one there on the left is what Roaring River looks like today. It's beautiful. The stream flows, that 20.4 million gallons coming out of the spring through the hatchery and then exiting into the river. And then the photo you see there on the left was actually from one of our historic floods in 2021, where we received several inches of rain in a very short period of time, and Roaring River got to roaring that day. Next slide. So the questions and decisions that our staff make daily is, how do we keep our visitors safe in this environment? So we kind of look at our workflow in two parts. A pre-storm and a during storm, and then after storm, of course, if we've got some sort of cleanup. But in the days leading up to a weather event, we are collecting as much information as we can from every source that we can get it. We begin conversations with the National Weather Service in Springfield. We start having conversations with our local emergency management agencies. On our park side, we start mobilizing staff for 24-hour coverage here at the park. And we will even start making camper notifications, because one of our jobs as park staff is we need to educate our visitors, who have come to a new place, to the dangers that they may be facing and some of the things that Mother Nature may be bringing with her. So we're usually making those decisions and those notifications in the hours up to a storm event, because we want our visitors to be as prepared as they can going into a storm event, so they can make good decisions for themselves. Day of events. So if we have an ongoing rainstorm or a middle of the night rain or a potential flooding event, we start having those conversations with the weather service. I lose a lot of sleep over rain here at Roaring River State Park, just because it seems like every rain event comes in the middle of the night. We start mobilizing staff in the park, monitoring the radar, monitoring what campers are doing. We start really monitoring the gauge to try and understand what the river is doing, so we can make decisions on when we're going to make our campers go to mandatory hookups or those evacuations, depending on how the rain or the floodwaters may be coming, because we do get our water from different areas. We might start at a campground 1 evacuation, and when 2 or 3 are going to be okay, or if the wet water is coming in from the west, we may have to move down and move campers out of campground 3 first, then campground 2. So it can be a very dynamic situation down here, and this is one of the areas where FloodSavvy really helps us, not only in the days leading up to the event and that decision making processes, but also through that forecasted, through some of that modeling, understanding where we may need to position staff to best deal with these situations. Ultimately, we kind of view it as it comes down to making the best decisions with the information we have on hand. Next slide. So we have started just this past year, or I guess this past spring, when FloodSavvy was coming online, looking at it in the days leading up to the events. We can have conversations with National Weather Service. It's nice to have an extra tool that's easy to understand here at the park level. Like I said, we're jacks of all trades. We're definitely not hydrologists. We're definitely not meteorologists, but FloodSavvy provides us with a tool that can help us better, understand.
Uh-oh.
Put out those big numbers. And I love the feature that we can kind of see, if this happens, where's the water going to go in the park? That helps us start to kind of build that decision-making process. Also provides us an opportunity to do less guessing and have better assurance that we're looking at quality data, because it is coming for the National Water Model. We are able to have those conversations with the National Weather Service to say, hey, this is showing one thing. What are your guys' thoughts on this? So it's a very powerful tool to help us have those conversations with National Weather Service meteorologists. And we've also just started using the tutorial to help us better understand the National Water Model. I think, like a lot of people, the first time you look at the National Water Model, there's all kinds of bells, lights, and whistles, switches, toggles that you don't know what they're doing, and they show you all kinds of different information. So having the tutorial has really helped us at the park level better understand the data that we're looking at through the National Water Model and how to manipulate it, so we can see it sitting here at the computer when we're not having those conversations with National Weather Service. And it's also going to become a tool for us to use with our staff to just train them on flooding. It's something that Roaring River has dealt with for more than 100 years, and it's something that we will continue to deal with in the future. So having our staff better prepared and understanding some of the technologies that we have access to, it's gonna be a big gain for the park as far as staff training. Next slide.
I guess that's it. And thank you for that. That was a really fantastic presentation. I think you're also highlighting a really important point too, is we are kind of interested to see how FloodSavvy could, for lack of a better term, call it like a gateway tool, is to use the tutorial to see FloodSavvy to get a better understanding for, I mean, I myself, I'm not a hydrologist by training, but just by working with this project, I've gained so much more understanding. And honestly, I forgot who said it, one of our interviews said it, but they were like, oh, we first went to the National Water Model, is kind of overwhelming, but now by going through the tutorial and going through FloodSavvy, it's actually not so bad. You know, you can kind of start to make sense of it. So our goal too was not to replace, and that's why we have all the disclaimers everywhere. It's never to replace the existing NOAA products, but it could be an entry point, and then to step up, or maybe it's a call to go check out another resource. That was always something we were hoping to come from this as well. So thank you for highlighting those points. I think those are really fantastic. Emma, did we have any questions pop up in the chat as Mike was talking? Or does anybody want to raise their hand and come off mute if you have a live question?
No questions in the chat. Looks like there's still some continuing questions around some of FloodSavvy's kind of capabilities and how we address uncertainty. And I mean, I don't know if Mike wants to comment on, you know, how he navigates kind of taking in the information from FloodSavvy, but also other official sources as well, from a community perspective.
Yeah, I think for us, you know, the uncertainties, we try and deal with those the best we can, but we also try and make our visitors know that, you know, some of this information we have is uncertain. And, you know, we really view that the camper contacts and the visitor contacts that we make, it's our, especially in the days leading up to events, it's to educate them that, you know, Mother Nature sometimes, you know, makes up her own mind, and that we're going to do everything that we can do to keep our visitors safe. But ultimately, it's up to them to make good decisions for themselves. And we share a lot of like the gauge with them to say, hey, you know, when the gauge gets to this, you know, stage, we're going to go to mandatory hookups. So yeah, the uncertainties are always a challenge. And that's where on our back end, we really rely heavily on our partners to help us make good decisions.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I guess we are nearing the end of our time and we have one speaker left. So thank you so much, Mike. If we could have Kellen Appleton from our Manascutney Regional Commission, if you wouldn't mind coming up from you, introducing yourself, and then doing me to switch your slides.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, y'all. My name is Kellen Appleton. Usually they pronouns. I work for Mount Ascutney Regional Commission here in Vermont. Coincidentally, directly the area between Ottaquechee, Two Rivers, where Tile works, and Windham County, where Margot works. So we've really gotten the full east side of Vermont here in terms of hydrology and planning. Yeah, so just a little bit of a background of what the sort of region is and what we're working with here. This is the Regional Planning Commission we're working with. This is an area of 10 municipalities, very similar to these other regions in Vermont. It's a hilly landscape, a mountainous landscape with a lot of steep slopes and small streams that turn into big rivers, which tend to have towns next to them, and a lot of development next to them. It's pretty rural in character. We have towns from just a few hundred people up to just a few thousand. And that's kind of the area here. So yeah, like I said, history of river valley development. Most of our towns, their town centers are next to these streams, these rivers, and in their flood areas. And because of that, we also have a history of flooding in the region. So this is a really exciting tool for us to look at how we interact with that, how we predict that, and how we plan around flooding. If you want to go to the next slide, that'd be great. Sure. So this slide is illustrating a little bit of the gaps in knowledge that we have around flooding and flood planning and our towns and how they can implement that. There's pretty limited stream gauging infrastructure in this region. There are 2 stream gauges. They're both on the Black River, which is the major river in this region, and they are both immediately next to each other. So it's basically the same as having 1 stream gauge. And they are also both directly downstream of a dam. So the information that we are getting from those stream gauges has limited applicability to the regions upstream of those gauges along the Black River, where many of our low-lying towns and town developments are. Most of the flood planning information that our towns and we have access to is through the FEMA documentation for special flood hazard areas, which is basically just looking at recurrence intervals. They are insurance information. It's about flood insurance. It's asking people to figure out approximately how often certain areas are going to be flooded, and that information tends to be pretty generically, this is either in the 100-year flood zone or it's not. And it doesn't give a lot of granularity about what different types of floods might look like, or how often they may occur, or these sorts of things. Also, most of this information is based around recurrence intervals, which we know are not specifically accurate. We are having, those recurrence intervals are changing. We're having bigger and bigger storms in the region. Our rates of severe precipitation in the region have increased something like 70 to 100% since the mid-90s. And so it's hard to gauge whether or not the numbers that we do have access to are useful or relevant in some of our emergency planning operations. So looking at the flood and the flood rivers, or the flood data rather, is really helpful to get some specificity. So what I wanted to do here is just go through a little bit of a case study for how we might look into this, and basically how we might use FloodSavvy to get a sort of gut check, a vibe check on rain events and flooding and how we might respond to that. So if you could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So yeah, I wanted to look at Proctorsville, Vermont. Proctorsville is a village in the town of Cavendish. You can kind of see this is a screenshot from FloodSavvy. This shows all the structures. It's right there along the Black River. It's in this classic Vermont development style of low-lying rivers to take advantage of that historic water power. It also means much of this is in the flood zone. And we do know that this has a history of flooding. If you want to hit the next slide, please. This is a picture from July 11th, 2023. You can see on the arrow where this is indicated on the map. This is from the 2023 Great Vermont Flood, as people have been calling it. So we know that this area does flood when it floods, but if I'm a town manager, if I'm a planner, if I'm looking at these sorts of things, it's hard for me to know whether or not this flood that we are seeing here, this inundation, is the 100-year flood, the 50-year flood, the 500-year flood, and whether that really matters when I'm thinking about how to respond to these things in the moment. Next slide, please. Cool. So this is just a screenshot of our local radar for, well, 2 weeks ago when I was submitting the slides for this presentation. And we coincidentally were going to have a rain event come through the region. And I was curious how this was going to affect the river, the Black River in Proctorsville, and whether this was going to result in any flooding if we needed to worry about that. Next slide. So what I did is I went into FloodSavvy and clicked on the stream segment in the village center of Proctorsville. The first thing I did was I looked at the historic stream flow, and I opened that up to the largest window that I could find all the way back to the beginning to today, and just looked at what historic floods looked like. And so you can see there's a spike on the left there. That's that July 11th, 2023 flood that we saw. Huge inundation, lots of damage to the village, very scary flood, very impactful flood. And what we were seeing is it was being modeled as about 161 cubic meters per second. And then there's a second spike off to the right there, which was from later in 2023, December 18th, 2023. We were seeing a 73 CMS flow there, which did reach that quote unquote flood stage point where the banks of the river were full. But we were seeing, or overfull, but we saw minor to no damage in the flooding from that. So what I'm looking at here is if something looks like what we got in July 2023, that's going to be pretty scary. If it looks like it's less than what we got in December of 2023, I'm a little less worried about the impact on the village. So then I hopped over to the forecasted stream flow for that segment and looked at the next upcoming days. You can see that this was before we had the color coding added into FloodSavvy, but you can see that there is a nice spike right there on November 10th up to 10.4 CMS, which is higher than the river had been previously. but is not anywhere near that like 70 CMS level where I'm starting to think about, okay, this is going to be scary. So to me, that was really reassuring, and it was a nice gut check to look at this and say, this isn't a perfect flood prediction tool. It doesn't replace all of the emergency management that we have. But when someone's asking me, hey, it's going to rain soon, do I need to be worried about my house? This was really helpful to be able to look at this and to think about it. Next slide, please. Yeah, to kind of reiterate what I just said in conclusions, Mount Scottney in our region, our live data, our real data, our gauged data is limited, and having the model data behind the kind of scary wall of the national water model makes it hard for us to access this data. We do have flood events here. They are catastrophic at times, but it's often difficult to contextualize those flood events with the weather and the stream flow that we're seeing. And tools like FloodSavvy and the tutorial into the National Water Model can help fill some gaps in that context. And yeah.
So thank you so much for that. Walking through that example, that was really fantastic. And so just thank you to Kellen and to all of our speakers. I think that, it's one of those things I'm sure I could have sat here and kind of told you about their experiences, but I just think it's so much better to actually hear it right from them. So we are sort of at the tail end of our talk, but I do want to open it up for questions if anybody has any specifically for Kellen or maybe directed at all of our speakers. In summary, while we still have them before we move on to our recap, as you can tell, they're a very insightful, knowledgeable bunch. So I'd highly recommend you take advantage of it if you do have a burning question. Awesome. Juicer. Hi, thank you so much for being here. Juicer is one of our NOAA collaborators on the project.
Hey, thank you very much. It was very interesting to learn from everybody. I have a question for Tony. I probably might have missed it because I saw that during the demonstration, we moved from flow-based flood maps to the stage-based flood map. And I don't know how did you switch it back and forth, because you were moving the slider, and I saw it was a flow-based slider, and then I went to the stage-based.
Yeah, surprised you caught that. No, there's no magic happening there. So what we have done is to generate the flow maps or the flood inundation extent, the flood maps. We actually we retrieve the synthetic rating curve for every river. And then what we've done is actually before we did that is we go and we look at the retrospective data, and we look at the statistics of what's happened in the past. In this particular case, what we're mostly curious about is like what was the maximum flow that has been modeled in the past. And then we buffer that by a percentage. I think we just took like 20 or 25%. Okay, so now we have our lower bound of flow would presumably be 0, but our upper bound is some number that's unique to every single river or reach segment. Then when we want to go generate the flood maps, what we do is we start from 0 and we increment in half-foot intervals until we hit that maximum flow. So we'll say, well, half a foot of stage. We go to the synthetic rating curve. We figure out what that corresponding flow rate is. And we use that to generate the flood map. Then we increment to the next half a foot, which would be 1 foot. And we just keep doing that until we basically exceed what we saw was the maximum flow. So everything is actually generated at predefined half-foot stage intervals. But in order to generate the flood maps for each individual reach, we need to like translate that into the flow rate that results based on in that reach for the synthetic rating curve. So what we end up having is flood maps for every reach that is available in the interface at half-foot intervals up to some variable maximum that depends. So sometimes it's like 14 feet, sometimes it's lower. We made sure that everybody will go up to 10 feet of stage, so there's some level of consistency. So some rivers that are really small or creeks that will never reach 10, it's a little bit not super accurate that you'd ever have a 10 feet of stage. Okay. So for every map, we now have the map corresponds to a flood stage in a half-foot increment, and then some specific flow rate that corresponds with the river. So when you drag that slider, all we're doing is we're bouncing between those half-foot increments, and we're displaying the corresponding flow rate that was used. When you select multiple rivers, that flow rate is going to be different for each of the rivers, right? So we don't want to show 4 different flow rates for a stage because that'd be really confusing. So instead, what we do is we just say, forget that, because now we've left reality at this point. Like, we're not dragging a slider and running this in real time. What we're really doing is just saying, hypothetically, if all of these rivers had the same hand stage, like 5 feet, this is what it would look like. So that's that, like, it's like a little smoke and mirror. It's not like, it's not magic. It's a little deceptive. I think we should probably explain that a little bit more. But that was our workaround.
Got it. Thank you.
Does that make sense? Or, I mean,
I think it makes sense. Yes.
okay. And if we don't, we certainly don't have
Because-
time for it now, but if you see like areas to improve on that approach, would love to hear it. Because that can be confusing.
Got it, because you are selecting different reaches. It was
Right. And
it was
that's why
reason.
we also said, okay, we're not going to let someone select more than 4. But we, because we don't want them to select like a giant stretch of river where the stage is going to differ along that profile, the river profile, or along the length of the river. But we do allow people to select 4 completely random rivers, right? So I think ultimately what we'd want to do is maybe you select the river and then allow someone to select the X number upstream segments or something.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think I had a second question. I think Christian, I think I will come back to you for this National Water Model manual. I will do it offline with you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's actually a great point, which kind of gets us into our concluding remarks and wrap up, because as you're seeing, FloodSavvy is honestly, it's wrapping up currently, but it is still very much in development, and we have a lot of ideas for what we'd like to do with it in the future. So just so you know, we're very open to feedback and conversations and things like that. So what we did want to make sure we left everybody with, which for the record too, we will be sending an email afterwards with lots of links to things, but all of the information that we shared specifically about our project, the first place you can find it is on our project website, which you can see in this, or if somebody from the team wouldn't mind just throwing a link into the chat. But this website includes, we mentioned this is a 3-phase project, so it includes all of our peer-reviewed publication and data from those interviews we did in phase 1, all 6 of those exploratory use cases we mentioned in phase 2, and then it also includes, there will be a link to this recording on our phase 3 website. It'll have all of those community use cases, a link to FloodSavvy, a link to the tutorials. This is sort of the one-stop repository. We also just wanted to make sure everybody had a link to FloodSavvy. This is still live, and as you see, we are still working on tweaking things, so it might continue to look a little bit different over the next weeks or months or so, but it is more or less, it's live, and you can go and access everything we talked about today here. And again, if we wouldn't mind just throwing a link to that again in the chat. And then separately, yes, the National Water Model tutorial is embedded within FloodSavvy, but it's also its own standalone resource. As I mentioned, you can either access it right here via this little tiny URL. We'll put a link in the chat. This is on FloodSavvy, our project website. And I think it's a really great kind of starting point if you are unfamiliar with the National Water Model and just kind of want to start to figure it out. And then our kind of parting words and next steps is we would really encourage all of you to start to explore NWIPS, that not National Water Prediction Service at water.noaa.gov, explore FloodSavvy, explore the National Water Model tutorial. Also on FloodSavvy, there's a whole list of other resources under the resources page for other really valuable NOAA specific or other hydrology related resources to get you started. We will make this recording available, so please feel free to share all of this information with kind of anybody in your networks you think might be interested. And if I haven't said it enough, we're really hoping that you will connect with us. So the first, I put my email here twice, because really, if you have any feedback on FloodSavvy or questions for our study team, or if you're interested in trying to figure out how you might be able to bring FloodSavvy to your region, we would love to have a conversation with you. So please, again, don't hesitate to reach out, or if you have somebody else's email that you've been in contact with, anybody on the study team will make sure your question gets to the right spot. Do not hesitate. Don't feel like you're going to email the wrong person. And then also, just so you know, too, we will be circulating an email after this that includes all of the links and recordings and things from this this webinar as well. And then I was really, really happy that I wasn't the only one talking today, but I just want to share, as Tony mentioned, this has been a really, really big team effort. So I just wanted to say thank you both to my GRI team members, the Quasi team members, all of our NOAA collaborators. Juzer is one of them, and then really, really the biggest thank you is to all of our community collaborators. This project just wouldn't even exist if you didn't participate. And I wasn't kidding before. If I could have waved a magic wand, this is the group of folks we would have worked with. It's just been fantastic. So thank you all. And just thank you. So this is the end of the webinar. I'm happy to hang out if anybody just has any lingering questions, you want to discuss anything. But at this time, Emma, we can go ahead and end our recording. And just thank you so much for everybody, all of our speakers and everyone who took the time to join us today.